Hello everybody, welcome back to Big Brain History. Today we're doing another reaction video. We are reacting to the Battle of Thermopylae, the Hellenic Alliance Part 1 by Extra History. As I've said before, I love Extra History. I think it's a great channel. I think they do a good job of making history interesting and fun for people to watch. And I'm really excited to watch this one. I'm about to take a trip to Greece tomorrow. I'm going to Athens, and then I'm going to Santorini and Corinth, and I'm really excited because I love Greek history. So to kind of celebrate it, I wanted to react to a video about Greek history. Now this video is about the Battle of Thermopylae, which is one of the most famous battles in history, but also probably the most overestimated battle in history, or over-exaggerated battle in history, because I think thanks to movies like 300, the battle has been blown way out of proportion. It did not happen like it happened in 300. It was not just 300 Spartans. It was thousands of Greeks that were fighting the Persians. It was just 300 Spartans that were there. But history's kind of forgetting about all of the extra help the Spartans had. But I think this video is going to be great. But let's hop into it. Oh, and before I get into it, if you want to see the original video without my commentary, I'll link it in the description below. Please be sure to check them out. They're awesome.
Corinth, 480 BCE. Representatives from 70 Greek city-states have gathered to discuss a common threat. Persia, the greatest empire the world has ever seen, is invading Greece. These Greek city-states are discordant and distrustful. Some of them are technically at war with each other, but they've come together for the first time in history to face a common enemy. Yet, even under the threat of annihilation, they can't agree. By the time they adjourn, only 30 states remain in this new Hellenic alliance. Of the 700 city-states in Greece, most have opted to either stay neutral or capitulate to Emperor Xerxes. The Greeks, those who are left, choose the place that they will take their stand. A lonely pass between a mountain and a sea. Thermopylae.
Now, one thing I want to say. If you go to Thermopylae, or I think it might be pronounced Thermopylae, I might be wrong. But if you go here today, it does not look anything like what it did when the battle happened. If you go on Google Maps, actually here, I'll show you. Okay, so this is, I think, the best spot I'm going to get on Google Maps to show you Thermopylae. So this is what Thermopylae looked like. You can see the roads here, the road signs. It was in this area that Thermopylae happened. As you can tell, it is not a narrow stretch. There are the mountains. These are the mountains that the Greeks fought on the left side of them. So when you're looking at Thermopylae, the mountains that were on the left, and then you have the ocean to the right. This is the mountains that were on the left. And then they were fighting in this narrow pass. And then way out there is the sea. So this is completely different than what it would have looked like when Leonidas fought here. It was a very narrow pass. I don't remember how wide it was. I think it was under like 1,000 meters wide. It was pretty narrow. Which worked out for them because they had a lot smaller army than the Persians. But today, it is miles of land that go way out into the sea. If you go to Google Maps. So you have Thermopylae right here, and then way out here is the sea. So the ocean has receded a lot since then. So it's kind of unfortunate. You can go to Thermopylae and visit it and know what happened there, but it's kind of hard to picture exactly what the battle would have looked because it looks so different today.
A total war code the ancient world. And the Battle of Thermopylae is one of the most significant events in the ancient world, and also one of the least understood. Because while most accounts of Thermopylae talk about the fighting and the tactics, the actual battle made little strategic difference. Despite the Greek allies' brave defense, Xerxes would break through and burn Athens.
Yeah, I think 300 makes it look like the Greeks won the battle. If they I think many people believe that at the Battle of Thermopylae, the Greeks won and the Persians were defeated and the war was over. No. All it did is it kind of slowed down the Persians, which is what they were going to do. They knew they were going to die. The Greeks that fought in the battle, they knew they were going to die. Their purpose was to slow the Persians because they wanted Greece to be able to rally and be able to fight. And they succeeded in that. Their goal was to slow them down, and they did slow them down for a little while. But it didn't stop the Persians. The Persians went on right past Thermopylae and actually went to Athens, and they tore Athens to the ground. So even though the Greeks win in the long run, they win the war, and they eventually do kick the Persians out, Thermopylae was by no means anywhere near the beginning of the end for the war.
Persian armies would harry Greece for another year. But as we will see over these two episodes, Thermopylae was important for a different reason. It came to shape how Greece thought of itself, and how the intellectual descendants of Greece still think about the world. Because Greece wasn't Greece yet. There was no Greek identity. It wasn't a monolithic culture. Rather, it was a handful of city-states that spoke vaguely the same language and worshipped some of the same gods. Many of these presumed Greek states thought that they had more in common with the Persians than their so-called kin. So before we get to the great battles and the heroic events, let's talk about the 3 players on the board: Sparta, Athens, and Persia. And any discussion of Thermopylae has to start with Sparta. Sparta was, without doubt, one of the most extreme societies in human history, a sort of eugenic warrior state. When each new citizen was born, elders would inspect the baby, killing it if it had physical imperfections. At the age of 7, every Spartan boy entered a state education system that drilled him in the arts of war, brutalizing him both physically and mentally, sometimes to the point of death, all in order to create an effective and unquestioning soldier. Men lived permanently in a barracks with...
Yeah, and this, it's a really cool aspect of Spartan culture, the whole warrior society. It's really fascinating, and everybody loves to learn about it. But it also hindered them in a lot of ways, because Spartan society, the men in Spartan society were born and lived to fight. They weren't there, most of them weren't there to go and run an economy or to make goods or just to do the things that a city-state needs to survive. Besides combat. So the city was very, 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 very overly reliant on slaves, which I think they called them heliots, if I remember correctly. But they were very reliant on slaves. And it was so bad that, according to things I've read, some would say you could hear the slaves screaming before you ever saw the city. Which I don't know if it's true, but it goes to illustrate the point that slavery was rampant in Sparta. But it also caused problems because throughout their history, Sparta was never quite able to achieve their potential with their military, because Sparta had to be kind of close to the home front, because at any moment they were constantly living in fear that the slaves would rebel. And if the slaves rebelled, there were so many slaves, it caused a huge problem. So the Spartan army always had to be kind of close. They couldn't ever go off very far because of all the slaves they had. So even though the Spartan military is dominant and it's very efficient and it wins a lot of battles, it also kind of proves to be I don't know, a hindrance to them because of all of the success they have on the battlefield and all the slaves they get.
Spartan society even mandating romance within the bounds of the military. But the result of this oppressively brutal system was that Sparta had by far the best heavy infantry in the ancient world. Spartan war consisted entirely of the phalanx, each man guarding the others, moving and fighting in a group. And Spartan society was the same. Duty to the state and self-sacrifice were paramount, and individualism was discouraged. But you can't talk about Spartan culture without talking about the Helots, the massive caste of enslaved people that Spartan society was built upon. Sparta had enslaved its Greek neighbors, forcing them to do back-breaking work. The reason that Spartans could devote their whole culture toward producing soldiers was that none of them had to do labor. Any labor. It was all handled by the people they'd enslaved. In fact, by the time the Hellenic allies gathered at Corinth, there were about 7 Helots for every Spartan. And this imbalance left the Spartans in a perpetual fear of slave revolts.
I mean, that's insanity. I mean, that means for 10,000 Spartans, you have 70,000 slaves. They are way outnumbered by their slaves. So you can see why the Spartans are so nervous to leave their city for very long, because whenever they're going off, their families are back home with a bunch of slaves that hate them. At any moment, these people could rise up and cause serious destruction to these people. And they did rise up. The Spartans did have to put slave revolts down. But you understand like why they were so afraid of this, because they just had so many slaves.
They were a warrior society not to fight wars abroad, but to prevent a Helot uprising at home. To ensure this, they kept the Helots in a perpetual state of terror. Spartan death squads regularly stormed Helot dwellings at night, torturing and murdering anybody who breathed resistance. This paranoia was so acute that Sparta often avoided deploying their troops abroad, preferring to guard against the danger within. But this fear also led Sparta to become the diplomatic juggernaut of ancient Greece. Constantly worried about its own security, the city formed a mutual defense pact with neighboring states, each pledging to come to each other's aid in case of invasion or revolt. And this coalition would form the backbone of Greek resistance against Persia. Of the 30 Hellenic allies, 14 of them joined because of their pact with Sparta. But you know who wasn't part of that pact? Athens. And there was some seriously bad blood between the two. Sparta considered the newly democratic Athens an existential threat.
Yeah, I mean, I think everyone knows this, but Athens and Sparta were arch rivals. They hated each other, and it's one big reason for this is that they are like a perfect dichotomy between each other. Sparta is a very militaristic, ruled by an oligarchy, uh, just all about the military, and there's no freedom. It's all about just war and fighting and slavery. While in Athens, you have democracy, so it's supposed to be about freedom, which they still had slaves. Everyone had slaves, but the Athenians themselves are supposed to be free. They can make their own decision. The people can vote for their own decisions. And for military wise, they also have a dominant military. But while Sparta is dominant on land, the Athenians are more worried about the sea, so they have a dominant navy. There's opposite in almost every single way, and it makes them arch enemies with each other.
And had even mounted a military intervention to stop its political revolution. After all, Athenian democracy had a tendency to spread, and what would happen if the Helots got wind of this new system of mob rule? This was likely on the mind of the Spartan representative, King Leonidas, as he spoke to the Congress, where he found himself suddenly on the same side as his Athenian rivals. Athens was the opposite of Sparta in almost every way. Athenians valued individualism, disdaining anyone who couldn't argue political opinions. Their society turned out philosophers, mariners, and playwrights, citizens first and soldiers second. And in this new democratic society, the elites were politicians, guiding the ship of state by persuading the populace to vote for ballot measures. And one of its greatest political minds was Themistocles.
Now, before he gets into Themistocles, very important figure, I want to give you a little fun fact about Athenian democracy. Athenians had this form of direct democracy, which was great and revolutionary, but it was also an experiment, and it also didn't work out too well on many occasions because when you have direct democracy, especially with Athens here, what's very new, they don't really know how to use it. It could cause problems because it's all dependent on who wants to come out and vote. So sometimes they would have an issue where they had to put it up to a vote, and it just happens to be like there wasn't a news station to find out that there was a vote today. It just if you saw it, if you were happened to walk by and see that they're having a vote, you could vote. So what happened is that sometimes they would have an issue, and they wanted the people to vote on it, but the crowd that gathered that day wasn't a very wise decision making crowd, and they would make a really bad decision in their vote. So to fix that, they would wait like a day or maybe a few hours or a couple days, and they would just hold another vote. And hopefully the next vote would go the way that they wanted it to go. So it's kind of interesting. Sometimes the crowd would make some disastrous decisions, and they would just have to re-vote on it because the crowd wasn't in a very good mood to make good decisions. So I love that little nugget about Athenian history. It's interesting.
When the city had discovered a new silver vein, he had persuaded the voters to use that money to found a navy, rather than just sharing the money out amongst the populace. And it was Themistocles, master of this shiny new fleet, who represented Athens at Corinth, putting aside his reservations about Sparta, much like Leonidas was putting aside his queasiness about working with Athens. Given the Spartans' warrior culture and diplomatic prowess, he even supported Leonidas as overall leader of the coalition. Where Sparta brought diplomatic and military might, Athens brought its navy and its creative streak. Because while Athenian democracy was more chaotic than Sparta's dual monarchy, it also gave them room for a more flexible type of strategic and political thinking. But it is important that we don't confuse Athens with a modern democracy. At most, only about 30% of the male population voted. Athenian women couldn't hold property or run households like their Spartan cousins. And foreign slaves, while not treated quite as badly as the Helots, did make up about half the population of this great city-state of equals.
Yeah, one thing I want to mention about the Athenian women versus Spartan women. While Spartans are not free, they don't have democracy, they're ruled by an oligarchy. If you were a woman living in Greece, you'd probably much rather live in Sparta than you would Athens, because in Sparta, women had way more freedoms in Sparta than they did anywhere else. Well, I think anywhere else in the Greece, but especially Athens. It was very common in the ancient world for societies to be kind of afraid of women. Like the Romans were notoriously, it was almost like they had a cultural fear of women. They just really shun them and push them out of society as best they could. But with Sparta, when all of the men are gone, Spartan women were kind of the ones that kept everything going. So Spartan women had a lot more liberties than any other Greek city states that were in Greece. It's really interesting.
In fact, while both Athens and Sparta insisted that they fought for freedom and against Persian slavery, they didn't mean freedom in the way that we understand it. They fought for the freedom of self-determination, to evolve their city-states into democracies or rigid warrior cultures as they saw fit. Because they were right, that kind of experimentation would not be tolerated under Persia. Yet the Persians, ironically, would tolerate a lot. Because, funny thing about those slavers of Persia, they didn't own slaves. The workers that built the great monuments of Persepolis, carving the empire's massive canals and engineering its underground irrigation tunnels, those people got paid wages according to their level of skill. In addition to that, the Persian emperors tended not to force their culture and religion on the people they conquered.
Yeah, so that is something interesting. I think also Hollywood has made everyone believe. Hollywood portrays Persia as this evil empire that's there to conquer and destroy everything, which they were an expansionist conquering empire, and obviously war is evil and all that. But if you had a choice during the day to live in an empire, Persia wouldn't be a bad choice. Persia was a pretty good empire to rule in or live in. They treated their citizens very well. Their religions, or they were Zoroastrianists, and Zoroastrianism is a very peaceful religion. Um, they basically just asked that you pay your taxes and give soldiers when needed. Other than that, they kind of stayed out of your business. So if you had to pick an empire to live in during this period, Persia would be a pretty good choice, and they aren't near as bad as they get portrayed as in movies like 300.
Or if people wanted to convert to Zoroastrianism, great. And if they wanted to adopt Persian culture, well, good on them. But it wasn't a requirement. In fact, the Persians often behaved more like liberators than conquerors, restoring people to their homelands if the previous ruler had uprooted or oppressed them. The empire's founder, Cyrus the Great, famously freed the Jews from captivity in Babylon. Everybody won. The Jewish elites got to go home, and Cyrus got a loyal buffer state between Persia and Egypt. And this tolerance was even more impressive considering the size of the empire. By the time the Persian Emperor Xerxes clashed with Leonidas at Thermopylae, his state stretched from northern India to Egypt to Ethiopia. And the Persian bureaucracy ran that territory with unprecedented efficiency. It was so impressive that Alexander the Great just copied it when he conquered Persia 150 years later. As long as territories paid their taxes and didn't revolt, Persia basically left them alone. If they did rise and revolt, though, the punishment was merciless. And that's where this whole business got started. In 499, Greek cities in Ionia rose against Persian rule, declaring themselves democracies. Seeing an opportunity to spread its governmental system, Athens aided its new sister cities and made themselves a permanent enemy. In response to this slight, the Persian Emperor Darius had invaded Greece, swearing to raze Athens to the ground. And he would have too, if a small Athenian army hadn't met him on the plain of Marathon. There, the Athenians won an improbable victory and drove the Persians into the sea. Which would have been slightly less improbable if Sparta had helped out, but the Spartans had been in the midst of a religious festival and refused to anger the gods by marching to war. But that wasn't the end of the Persians' ire. Oh no. For the armies of Darius' son, Xerxes, were marching into Greece, crossing the Hellespont on a kilometer-long pontoon bridge built by Egyptian and Phoenician engineers, accompanied by the largest invasion ever assembled. Where his father had failed, Xerxes aimed to succeed. So Athens and Sparta, these once and future enemies, got to work.
Yeah, so there's a lot of things in this that I personally found very interesting. One of the things that I really love about this history is the amount of soldiers involved in these battles, because this war is thousands of years ago. And I always like to compare these things to like medieval Europe. Medieval Europe, which is much more recent than any of this, I mean, an army from 1100 AD. If you had a battle in 1100 AD, you might have an army with 20,000 men in it. And that's a big army. 20,000 soldiers in 1100 AD in Europe. If it's a British or French army, that's a good sized army. But that has nothing on the numbers of these soldiers that were in this period. And I also love, I'm kind of getting off on a side tangent, but I want to share some things that I love about history. I think a lot of people always look at history as it's always progressing and it's always moving forward, and we never go back. But in many ways, the ancient world was way better than anything the Middle Ages had, which is why it's called the Middle Ages. But there are times in history where we progress and then dip and progress and dip. It's never don't ever take for granted the time you live in now. The time you live in now is the best time in history to live. It's you have all the technology, you have way better technology than it's ever existed, and it's made life so easy and so great. Life expectancy is so much better. You can travel the world, everyone's connected. It's so great. Don't ever take it for granted, because you're not guaranteed to always have that. You're not guaranteed to always progress. People like to think 1,000 years from now we won't be traveling the stars, but you're not guaranteed that. History has shown that sometimes you can go backwards, and when you go backwards, it can be devastating. Because when the Persians invade, they're going to use armies well over 100,000 soldiers, and the Greeks are going to have armies of over 50 to 75,000 soldiers, if I remember correctly. But the Persians have well over 100,000 soldiers in some of these battles. Like the final battle in this war, the Greeks have to defeat a Persian army of 100,000, and that's after most of the Persians have already left. And that's mind blowing. It's just incredible to me that you can have wars a thousand years in the past to the Middle Ages, and they still have nothing. The technology of the Middle Ages has nothing on this. It's incredible to me.
After days of strategizing, Themistocles proposed a
And not technology, but just sheer organization and manpower. In some ways, their technology was better, but that's kind of what I'm getting at.
two-front defense. First, the Athenian navy would stop the Persian fleet from landing troops behind the Greek army. Second, Leonidas and his Spartans would hold the Persian army at bay on land, in a lonely pass named after the geothermal springs nearby. This pass was known as the Hot Gates, Thermopylae.
Okay, so the video is going to end before you get into the battle itself. Like I said, I love this channel. It's really great. This battle fascinates me, so I'm sure we're going to get on to the second episode soon. I'm leaving on my trip tomorrow. I'll be gone for a week. So unfortunately, I won't be able to get to the next episode till I get back. Oh, but I'm really excited for it. I'm going to try to get some footage of Greece while I'm out and try to get some shorts made while I'm out. Hopefully you guys will watch those and like them. But again, if you want to see this video without my commentary, it's in the link below. I really appreciate you guys watching, and I hope you liked it. And I hope you all have a great day, and I'll catch you guys in the next one.